Those Space People, a podcast series of casual cosmic conversations with people working on exciting space projects. So today we have Priyanka Rajkakati with us. She is the head of special projects at Vortex IO, which is a company that provides water intelligence. Vortex IO is based in Toulouse in France. And Priyanka has a PhD in aerospace engineering in the area of navigation, signal processing, and she also has a background in systems engineering. And very interestingly, Priyanka is also an artist, a space artist. So I'm super thrilled about having this conversation with you, Priyanka. Welcome to the podcast.
Equally thrilled. I really love the work you do. So I'm very honored to be here on this podcast with you.
Oh, thank you. You're so kind. So before we go into this exciting world of space art, which I'm really looking forward to talking about, let's talk about your current role, right? So, firstly, how exactly is Vortex IO providing water intelligence? And what is your role there as the head of special projects?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Vortex is actually trying to build a system of in situ monitor. Sorry, okay. So what Vortex is actually doing is it's building these microstations that kind of are like a transfer of technology from satellites into having something which provides you real time in situ data. So it's basically complementary to satellite data because one of the biggest challenges today is with revisit times or cloud coverage, etc. You don't really have access to information in real time. So what Vortex is trying to do is while using satellite imaging and interferometry data into the calculations, they also use a system of in situ sensors to complete that data. And the idea behind it, which is the project I'm leading actually, it's called the Worldwide Hydrological Large Scale Database, WHYLD project. It's indeed a WHYLD project. It's to develop Europe's first flood forecasting system.
Oh, wow.
And how I joined it is actually through an artistic project. So the story goes that I was at a point in my life where, okay, failure is what leads to success eventually. That's what I believe. I had finished my PhD, I had co-founded a company, and then I was still not very happy with the work I was doing because I felt like it was not very impactful in the long run. It was exciting, but for me, I come from Assam. We have this. I have to always keep that in mind that I come from a very specific background, and what my definition of impact for me would be very different from the definition of impact for somebody who's grown up in cities in our first world country. So that's why I wanted to shift my focus into something which brings in into my role a bit of everything that I was already doing or I was good at, which is engineering, mathematics. But on the side, also what I was craving for this a bit of a socio-cultural aspect into the role. What I mean by that is something which links society with the technology which we're building. For me, I believe that just developing a technology is not enough. You have to really adapt it to who is going to use it, especially in the context of India, because it's a huge population and it's not a one size fits all situation. Not for clothes, not for food, not for religion, and certainly not for technology. So how can we adapt these technologies to these kind of? We're living in a world which is actually very, let's say, at the forefront of. Okay, we're living in a world which is actually in the current state of crisis because on one side we have all these rocket launches doing all these cool things. On the other hand, there is this very imminent threat, the climate crisis threat, and we are already part of the generation which is spending so much of our efforts in trying to come up with solutions, trying to solve a problem which was not even at the base, not even ours. So it's leading to a lot of psychological depression, etc. in our generation. So that's why a lot of us, amongst my friends, also I see we're shifting into a very climate focused career. And same for me. My background, of course, I have studied a lot of science, a lot of my PhD, etc. But at the base, I actually started off as an artist just after school.
Oh, wow, I did not know that.
So just after school, I was actually selected, and I had three things to choose from. One was School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi. One was St. Stephen's College, of course, where I ended up doing physics. And the third one was National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad.
That is so cool. Wow. So your path into the space industry or the space ecosystem was through art.
Yeah, so I went to NID actually. I went and spent a month there before. We're from India, and my mother, she called me up. She said, "Oh, I didn't become a doctor just so that my daughter could finish on the streets as an artist."
Wow.
So I was like, okay, well, this art stuff can always happen on the side, but it's also interesting to have that background where you not only see the overall perspective. Just after school, I was selected into three different, very distinct universities. One was for architecture at the School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi. The second one was St. Stephen's College, where I actually ended up going to pursue physics. And the third one, which was like a very short stint, but that was the first acceptance I had gotten, was at the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad. And I actually went there. I went, spent a month, and I did the foundation course. But I unfortunately was not able to stay because I got this phone call from my mother one day saying, "Oh, I didn't become a doctor so that my daughter could finish on the streets as an artist." I went back to choice two, which was St. Stephen's College, and got my bachelor's in physics. And from there, I got selected to École Polytechnique in France, where I ended up continuing this exploration of science, which for me at the base was just out of curiosity. You learn so much, you understand phenomena, you understand how to logically describe the world around you. So for me, this was very helpful actually as an artist. And I continued working on my art projects as well on the side. I you know, ended up sending a piece of my work to the International Space Station eventually. For me, it's been quite an interesting career where trying to not specifically put too much effort into mixing art and science because that just comes with the kind of personalities that we have, where we're just trying to push for what we want to do. So this kind of worked out very organically. But yeah, space artist.
That is so cool. Yes, we'll definitely come back to the whole space art. But before that, you mentioned that Vortex IO is trying to is trying to predict floods, right? So it's trying to be the pioneer essentially in Europe in flood prediction. So, what really are the challenges in flood prediction, and how much in advance, how far ahead in advance is Vortex IO trying to or aiming to predict? And yeah, can you talk about everything around flood prediction?
It's a very difficult thing to do, predict floods, which is why we don't have one single database which is fully reliable. And before I describe what Vortex does, I wanted to go a bit into what my previous research was with NISAC. So I'm still working with that team, something I'm working on the side. During this research, we found that one of the biggest challenges was, like I said, last mile information dissemination. Imagine you're on the banks of the Brahmaputra and you're somebody who's forced to keep migrating to another drier part of the valley every year. And then you end up losing your house or you end up losing your belongings. Then you have to recreate this cycle every single year. You and me, we we are very lucky that we had the opportunity to spend years studying or building ourselves up. If we had to keep reinventing ourselves, it's not going to lead to any personal development. You're always spending time worrying. Yeah, you're in survival mode the whole time. And this actually puts a lot of stress. This is also linked to public policy because you have this whole chunk of the population which is, instead of actually positively contributing to the economy, is actually spending entire lives in the survival mode. So it's a cyclic equation to solve where these people are actually a very important part of the equation. And to reach out to all different kinds of these stakeholders, I don't really like using the word in this context because it makes humans seem like reduced to,
Business entities.
yeah, exactly. How do you reach out to these people? Exactly. So one of the problems with flood forecasting today is for us scientists, it's wow, 70% accuracy in predicting flood 2 days before an event. For the average user, 70% accuracy is 30% of the time. One third of the time, it's not working. It's a wolf's cry. And they do not adhere to the solution. They don't trust it. And they don't really understand even the technical difficulty of such a system. So this is why I thought you needed a very cross-disciplinary approach to build these kind of systems. And one of the missing links is art, language that everybody speaks. You don't really need words for it. You just need to have a creative approach to sharing this information. So that was the context. And at Vortex, what they're trying to do is basically a lot of the flood prediction happens today using a lot of models, such as the Heck HMS model. And you need to really complete that with ground sensors. So that's what Vortex is trying to do, to complete that information using ground sensors, which can reduce the error of the margin for your error in your calculations. And even if you're using a lot of AI models to do your prediction, you still need to have information that is calibrated. Even if you're using satellite data, you need to calibrate it with ground sensor data. So that's what it's trying to achieve. And the project I'm running, it's actually very interesting. There's a history of success and failure even behind that. So the project I was running with ISRO, I was asked to apply for this grant, and the grant was not a small amount. It was like 1 million. And I said, okay, I'm talking about art in the middle of technology. No one's going to take it seriously. But hey, okay, fine. I can use this as momentum to build this. And I started talking with different companies, different people, different researchers, artists, some even very successful people. And we all converged to the same conclusion, which was that yes, we need more technology, but we also need this artistic element to complete the point of that, why we're building that system. And I actually ended up getting selected. I started clearing more and more rounds towards winning this 1 million with this project. And then eventually I came second. And this was the disappointment was not that I came second because I was not really expecting to win it. The disappointment was from that room of all the hundreds of applicants, only two are invited to pitch. One walks out with 1 million, the other one has to pay for their own coffee.
Oh, no, that's not.
Like, बहुत बुरा लगा, really upset. And but I said, okay, it doesn't matter. Like, at least got to the final round with just a back of the envelope sort of a concept involving artists. Maybe there are other companies that can, or grants that would love to support this kind of project. And yes, Vortex was actually part of this whole ecosystem from the beginning. It was actually the French embassy in India who put me in touch with them because they said, okay, here's an Indian based out of Toulouse. Here's a Toulouse company working on something similar. See what you can do. And then people at Vortex were like, look, forget about the million. Here is 2.5 million
Wow. Now that's a good story.
for testing out this project in Europe. So the project I'm working on, the WHYLD project, is basically to test a similar system in Europe in two pilot areas in France and in Croatia. And what I'm trying to achieve through this project is, of course, the flood forecasting system, but also try to address that gap with society, with the end users. And we are working on some exciting projects, some of it supported even by the WMO. So, a UN backing for an art project. How cool is that? And yeah, I'm really excited to see where this goes.
That's pretty amazing. Using art for last mile information delivery, essentially, and dissemination is super cool. It would never have crossed my, unfortunately, engineering brain. With that is something that's incredible. But how can you give an example of in what form are you making this art, and how exactly is this whole last mile dissemination happening using art?
The role of art and culture in a project like WHYLD, it's multifold. I can think of three reasons already. The first one is, of course, it's artistic media is like a very good way for creating materials for outreach, to speak about, to go to all of these end users and show them physically something, not just text or a research paper, but really a nice diagram that you can show to explain how floods are caused. How can this microstation be actually used for for collecting data, and what does a flood model look like? What is the end result? So all of this can be visually charted out through an artistic project. So we're working on that at the moment. The second one is actually using it to engage with society. Imagine you're installing this solar panel technology on a bridge which is open access to anybody, and so you're at a risk of vandalism, etc. But then you go to local schools and you tell them, hey, this technology is here for your benefit, for helping out your community. Can you prepare some artwork for us? And then you go and put it onto the microstation. So this solves this issue of, initially it was just something you install and nobody really cares about, but now it's become part of the community. And kids care about it, their parents would care about it, the mayor would care about it. So it's reaching several levels of these stakeholders. And the third reason why I'm doing this is, it's more philosophical in the sense, it's also why I was working on all these projects which send art to space, which is having this dialogue with scientists, astronauts, etc., on why are you doing what you're doing? What is the purpose of this? And how you're different from a robotic existence. So in this case, for me, what makes you human? So this thing, because for me, art is something which is not illogical. Illogical is not the word. It's beyond the realms of logic. So on one side, we have science to understand everything in a logical, structured way, but art can also help you explore so many things, brainstorm, try to understand, go deep into the psyche of an entity to understand where is this going. And so for me, in a concrete example of this third part of the philosophical exploration of this technology is, I made this piece of artwork last year, 15 minutes acrylic, but it was 15 minutes of pure intent. I really wanted this out of my head onto paper using acrylic as a medium. And this piece of art is now currently hosted at Vortex. It was a gift for them. And its numerical version, its digital version is actually flying to the moon on board the Firefly Blue Ghost lander.
Wow. Is there a web link where we can look at this art?
So the project is called Lunark, uh, Lunark DAO. They are building it still. So I don't know how ready the website is from the Lunark side. And with space missions, where everything is delayed, so I don't know when it's going to happen. But at least being selected for it was quite nice. I'll send you the link.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm going to include the link in the description of the episode. Yeah.
Perfect, thanks. Otherwise, I can also share the link to my art. So I have an art studio in Toulouse, and on that page, on that website, I have a page dedicated to just this philosophical exploration of floods.
Absolutely. That would be super, super interesting. Because to my, like I said, to my engineering brain, art and especially space art seems more of a hobby and a passion project one pursues on the side. But from what you say, there seems like there's so much more to it. It seems like a fantastic way of, in your words, incorporating tech into societies and communities and for last mile information delivery, essentially, right? So these applications of art are something that I've never really imagined.
Just wanted to add that this, like how you summarize it, it's not a new concept. People have actually been working on scientific artistic exploration of science since the beginning of, and it even predates the definition of science. More recently, even NASA, in the early days of post-Apollo missions in the 70s, they started having these artist residencies where they would invite famous artists from that time to imagine what these future interplanetary societies might be like. And one of them is actually, let me just remember, ah, early morning brain, not very good with information. Yeah, so I'll just redo that. I'll just let me open my. Yeah, I was saying that. Yes, like you summarized it, art can be actually a very useful part of any kind of scientific exploration, which can actually help advance the science itself. A very concrete example of this, and this is not a new concept, it's existed for, since even before science as we know it, came into existence.
Absolutely. That's how we started. Cave paintings were how humans first began expressing themselves.
To start, documenting. It was a mode of, a medium for documenting what they saw, these phenomena that they wanted to explore. And so, to give a more concrete example, even in recent times, NASA has had these artist residencies where they invited famous artists of the time. Even post Apollo in the 1970s, there was this one residency on imagining the future of interplanetary space exploration. And some of these artworks, like Toroidal Colonies by Rick Giddis, you see them, you see a vaguely familiar version of that even in movies today, like Interstellar, when they had that spiral colony. So you look at, I invite you to look at this artwork by Rick Giddis, and you'll see it's roughly the same. So these things were imagined decades ago, and NASA has been using a lot of these artist residencies to plan future missions, to give a vision, because you can have a goal for a scientific mission, but then what is the vision behind it? So that's where art comes in.
Now that you mentioned this, right, you talk about this torus, for example, the torus shaped settlement, space settlement orbiting a planet or in orbit essentially in space. So actually how I got into space is also through these space settlement design competitions organized by NASA. When I was a high school student, I participated in one of those, and actually that this picture, like this torus, like you said in Interstellar, where you see people living inside the torus and the centrifugal force essentially simulating gravity, and then you see like this whole the horizon just curve upwards, and then
Yeah, that's
this was the first image I saw, and then it just blew my mind as a 10th grader, because back then I wanted to be a doctor, a very boring profession. Now in retrospect, of no, being a doctor is, I'm sure it's quite incredible. But yeah, so I wanted to be a doctor and a psychologist and blah blah. And then I saw this picture, and this is what like really got me hooked. So now, yeah, it really makes a lot of sense, because that picture denoted probably like an entire research paper, right? Because at that point of life, I was definitely not capable of understanding this whole thing, but just this one picture conveyed so much information. So yeah, I completely get what you're trying to say. Wow, that is so cool. It took me so many years to realize that.
a lot of famous scientists have also been artists. I think even Vikram Sarabhai, I heard, was used to be a painter.
Oh wow. I think it really opens up your imagination.
And what you're doing through these podcasts is like an exploration of expression, right? So for me, even that can be considered as art.
This is as right-brained as I can get. Yes, I will accept it. Thank you. Can call myself a space artist. Priyanka, you were also talking about the project that you were doing in Assam before your foray into Vortex and all this happened. And you also mentioned that you were collaborating with NESAC, which is the Northeast Space Application Center, one of the ISRO centers. How did you come about to? How did you contact them? Did they reach out to you? How did this whole collaboration start?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting story. And so I'm from Assam. I didn't grow up there, but I grew up immersed in Assamese culture wherever my parents took me. And for me today, having spent one third of my life in France, one third in Delhi, and the first third, flitting between Shimla, Assam, and Delhi, I don't really have this sense of identity, right? Maybe you would also agree.
Yeah. Oh, I would say that's pretty cool. As someone who spent the first 25 years of her life in a single city, except for a few years during my undergrad, I would love that kind of a life.
It makes you like an international citizen, but now I don't know. I'm like not Indian, not French, not Assamese. No, a mix of everything.
I think that's good. It makes you a global citizen that you can understand problems of different people.
But yeah, exactly. So that does teach you perspective because you come to the West and great people, not going to disown them, but there is a very different context when you come from India. Spent a lot of years in France. I was attending this conference in Oxford. Very lucky to have attended it. But the thing is, I know it was not a conference, but I restart. Okay. Yeah, I was part of this. Do I mention? There's no point mentioning about the Karman Fellowship. But anyway, I was at Oxford to attend. So the story goes that chronologically, how it developed, have always been very interested in and emotionally interested in floods because Assam, to give some context, there was a study published in Nature which said that in the next 50 years, the two countries that are going to be the most flood hit in terms of impact on population is India and China. And in India, you have the Niti Aayog, which did a study on climatic effects of flooding on its people. And turns out that of the 13 districts which are going to be the most affected by floods due to climate change, 10 are in Assam.
Oh my God.
So, and as an artist, I was starting to build a nice profile and reputation in Assam, and I kept hearing people say, "Ah, people like these, they go abroad and then they bring back so much back to the country." And I was like, "What am I actually bringing back?" Something just awakened inside of me. I said, "Okay, I'm studying." I'd been reading up a lot about floods in Assam since I was a child. My grandmother would tell me about how the first floor got flooded year after year. And these things just started becoming first floor of a one-story house, by the way, so it's a big deal. So I was just like, okay, all of these people are getting affected, and then there are all these studies that are published. Okay, 1 billion USD worth of losses, $500 million worth of losses. These are huge numbers. And I was saying, all this money which is wasted in post-disaster management, if we could use even 10% of that in just disaster preparedness, leaves us 90% of that budget for progress. And in the context of Assam, it's very important because the Northeast is not, like to keep it that way, like to keep it pristine, but it's still not one of the most developed parts of India. So that's when I started thinking of how flooding is actually a core element of the problem that's need to be solved towards having more progress in the Northeast of India. And I started researching into it. I started looking up who are the people build, who are the people working on this problem, and that's how I came across the research of Dr. Diganda Burman. He's one of the chief scientists at NISAC, and he was one of the brains behind the system called FLUS, Flood Early Warning System. And I reached out to him. This was pre-COVID. I just wrote him an email saying, "Hey, can we please have a chat? I really want to understand the problem of flooding. I'm a scientist based in France, etc. I'm starting to get interested in it. I'm working space science, and I'm also an artist, and I want to explore a bit the whole ecosystem of flooding." And he wrote back to me actually saying, "Ah, yeah, it's a very important topic. Let's chat." Then COVID happens. We lose touch. And then fast forward a few years, I got selected for this prestigious fellowship. And one of the things that you can benefit from that fellowship is go to Oxford and audit the MBA Smart Space elective course. And I was there. I spent 1, 2 weeks in Oxford, and I still felt that today's space environment is too focused on a very particular privileged section of society. And if you want to actually kept hearing talks about, oh, we need to reach out, we need to be more impactful in developing areas. But like, you cannot solve a problem that you cannot see. A lot of That's the problem with space today. I feel like a lot of the problems that we hear, oh, space is going to do this, space is going to do that, is being solved by people who are not even aware of what the problem actually looks like. And for me, that problem looks like a dendritic structure of a river which is 6 kilometers wide on average, except in the period of flooding when it can be 30 kilometers wide. So that's the extent of the problem that I can see. I have that context. And again, I was like, okay, I need to go back to my this scientist and see what is the how can we work together on this, and what is okay, you have this very advanced technical system, but what exactly are the challenges that it's facing? And then and I have this friend from university also who just happened to be studying the socioeconomic dimension of flooding. So I said, okay, let's form a team, the three of us. And we started discussing, and then that's when we all these things started coming to light that you need to address this issue of last mile dissemination. So from the side of the ISRO scientists, it was like, okay, this is the technology, this is where the challenges lie. From the side of my friend who is a socioeconomist, okay, I understand the social context. There's also this historical context, post-colonial context. The fact that there was a huge earthquake in the 1950s, which led to 4,000 kilometers immense being made 3 years after we got independent. And 75 years later, it's these embankments which are starting to break. So a lot of the flooding in Assam is a result of embankment breach more than just over flooding, and which means that it's actually, if you want to model it mathematically, it's not a deterministic problem, it's a probabilistic issue. And so I said, okay, all this is great, but then let's bring the third element to this problem, which is art, and actually explaining how can we actually solve this problem, keeping in mind who is actually suffering from it the most. And then we started building this concept. We even gave it a name, so River and Veins. So the Reveins initiative. The idea behind calling it Reveins was, for me, a fluvial system is like a cardiovascular system. It's like we take care of our blood. We don't just suddenly change channels of our blood system. To be in good health, we need to make sure that our blood is in good health. Similarly, for an ecosystem to survive in its optimal state, you need to make sure that the river that feeds it is actually healthy. And you're not trying to unnecessarily channel it or control it, or there's so much deforestation happening, which is also affecting the embankment, the capacity of the embankments to hold on to flooding. So a lot of these things go together, really. It's not, even though I'm a systems engineer, for me, I think I specialize more in the part where systems engineering breaks, and you actually have to look at the whole system as a whole. So that's what the Reveins initiative is about. And voila, the story of how I got in touch with this ISRO scientist, how we ended up building a concept together, and the next step that I want to do through Vortex and through the support of a lot of these stakeholders that were on board while we were building this concept.
That is so cool. That is really so spot on. You when you said we cannot solve a problem that we cannot see. I think that's essentially the gist of, I guess, one of the biggest challenges of the space as an industry, because we still have this mindset of we will build and they will come. So there's a colossal difference between the upstream side of things, the technology we are building, and the actual applications, and the far end of the applications where it really impacts the end users.
And this is where I think art can actually help, because, okay, you cannot solve a problem you cannot see, but you can imagine what that problem might be like. So this is where, if technologists were just opening their eyes and working directly with artists, one part of trying to understand the problem is already solved, because here you have somebody whose job is to imagine. And then you go and you don't reinvent the wheel. You just go and you verify some of that observation, some of that imagination through real observation. So that's how So that's how I feel artists have a role in a fully scientific technological system.
Yeah, absolutely. So everything, especially Priyanka, when you said how you compare it to the cardiovascular system, when you talked about the name river and veins, Reveins, this sounds very, all the points, the way you express this whole thing, it sounds so similar to this. I don't know if you read a lot of space sci-fi, but there's this Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers.
I heard of it. I haven't. Like, do you recommend it? I would love to read it.
It's
Okay.
incredible. So I'm obsessed with space sci-fi, so I read like a lot of things, but this one, this series has I've read from Asimov, from like the classic Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and even the latest Three Body Problem, a bit of hard science fiction, a lot of these other things. But none of these struck me the way this Wayfarer series has really. I would say it was an art because it inspired me to think of space and the future of space exploration from a very humanitarian perspective. And oh my God, I really hope you can read the series. It's so incredible. And the best part is, I guess it's 4 books published so far, and each subsequent book just gets better. It's usually not the case, right? So that's
The best kinds.
I know, yeah. So it's like such a rarity because usually the first book is the best in a series. But this one, I would say it gets progressively, exponentially better, and it's so incredible. Because this gives usually, I'm sorry, every time there's the topic of space sci fi, I get super excited. Sorry. But usually, yeah, because for me, that's also how you imagine the future. That's actually one of the reasons that I am still working in the space sector, because being an engineer, I imagine myself as like one of the many cogs in the wheel, as an engineer who's trying desperately to keep the spaceship together. These characters who'll just whip out their tool set and then fix things and then hack into things and then do stuff. So this is my big motivation. Anyways, yeah, so this book is like so incredible because usually how space sci-fi goes, a lot of these books, they have a protagonist, you have an antagonist or a protagonist team or a protagonist, I don't know, like a company or a firm or something, right? So it's always very black and white. Sometimes there's shades of gray, but there's always like a conflict. There's something happening, there's something a bit dramatic happening. But these books, the Wayfarer series, nothing really dramatic happens. It's very similar to how real life just goes on. So in an everyday mundane life, it's not like there's an invasion and then there's a war and then blah blah. You don't have this on an everyday basis, right? You have more a lot of conflicts between humans, between different perspectives. Everyone means well, but then because of their perspective or the way they express things or what they prioritize differently, a conflict arises. So it conveys a lot of this. It captures all these elements of humans working in space and also a little bit of non-humans. So I don't want to spoil the series for you, but it's gives a very different approach to this whole sci-fi scene.
Actually, now that you mention it, sci-fi has actually been very important for space exploration, right? Like a lot of the
Today's sci-fi is tomorrow's technology, right? That's the motto.
exactly Jules Verne, French author. Yeah. Okay. So Jules Verne, when he wrote, what is it? From Earth to Moon, from the Earth to the Moon. Yeah, that's the book, De la Terre à la Lune. It's a 1865 novel by Jules Verne. He was already imagining what rockets would be like, and even some of the Russian sci-fi, they had been very influential in the way modern rocketry took shape. So there's a very interesting history over there. And even today, if you look at it, I really like this author called Alistair Reynolds. If you read his books, he writes short stories, and I really like them. And some of them were adapted into this series called Love, Death, and Robots on Netflix.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of this.
So in Love, Death, and Robots, there's this one short film I really like. It's just 11 minutes. It's called Zima Blue, and it's my favorite film in existence. It's just 11 minutes. It has space, it has science, it has robots, it has art, and it's a very interesting understanding, and it has philosophy of what we are doing, why we are doing, and the last scene still gives me just thinking about it is giving me goosebumps. Very highly recommend.
Yes, that's my to-do list for today. That's on the top of just got to the top of my to-do list for today. Now that you also mention, there is this Polish sci-fi author Stanislaw Lem. I don't know if you. It's this guy who. Sorry, he. What's this movie called? Solaris. I don't know if you know this. It's a Soviet sci-fi drama film. It's based on. Oh, it's very old. It's like maybe 60, 70 years old, in the 70s. Yeah, so Solaris also is a very interesting.
Yes, yes, yeah. I haven't watched it.
I mean, again, this is not like very happening. Nothing really happens. Even the book is very boring. But then the whole, after you finish the book, the whole ramification, what it really could have meant is what made a huge impact on me. And I couldn't stop thinking about it for like weeks together after I finished the book. So for me, that is this kind of a book that keeps lingering in your mind. And with every moment, the more you think about this book, the you realize how profound it is. And it just keeps, yeah, this profoundness just keeps deepening, and that's just incredible. So Stanislaw Lem also wrote a bunch of short stories, sci-fi based short stories, and then these are more sci-fi, like less spacey and more there's a lot of math jokes, and there's a lot of really hardcore fun, and yeah, that's also quite amazing. Yeah, I guess it also has its very Soviet era, Soviet-esque kind of book.
Yeah, and even 19th century fiction from the Soviet era. Okay, 19th century is pre-Soviet. Right. Yeah, a lot of that was there is evidence to believe that, and Goddard, they were all kind of inspired by a lot of these. In fact, Herman Obert, he was an advisor on this. He was a technical advisor on multi-stage rocket design for this movie called Woman in the Moon.
Oh yes, Frau im Mond. That's actually a German.
Woohoo, German connection. Okay.
It's a German.
So yeah, exploring all this.
I guess this was the first space sci-fi movie or a first space movie ever.
They actually consulted Obert to show us a rocket stage separation for this movie. Yeah, if you consider science fiction as art, then even if you like Arthur C. Clarke was with Kubrick for Space Odyssey. So there's so many examples where people really took their imagination to the next level. And it's actually, we've seen, as you said, today's imagination becomes tomorrow's technology. Or today's science fiction becomes tomorrow's technology.
Wow, we spoke about so much of art, and I just realized there's been so much of art in my journey in the whole space ecosystem. And only after this conversation with you did I realize this. I've been surrounded and inspired by so much of space art.
Yeah, that's the story I hear everywhere. Yeah, I didn't realize it, but I've been an artist my whole life. Yeah, because I don't think it's for me. Art is not like a classifiable career choice. It's just a way of being. And then you apply even where I'm working. I've been told that I'm able to bring a lot of value to the project just because, thinking of it in a slightly different manner, the different lens.
I think it's a very interesting combination, right? Like, I guess you're probably one of the very few people who started out as were actually artists at heart, and then to understand this whole thing better, forayed into engineering, and then you got your PhD in engineering, and then this is very cool. This is so incredible, Priyanka. So how can artists or space professionals with, let's say, artistic inclinations pursue art in space? What pointers can you give them? I don't essentially mean making a career out of art. Like we've seen, it can be a bit difficult to expect to get your life sustenance from art.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately.
Not very evident. See, still working as an engineer.
But yeah, if someone wants to explore their artistic side, or like you perhaps to undertake these collaborations or art projects, how can they go about? Where do they look essentially?
So the first step to that is, of course, to explore and come up with a concept that you can showcase to people, actually. So that's what happened to me. The Moon Gallery project that I was part of, these are equations I've been working on since I was a kid. When I started learning to code, and while people were coding databases, I was like, oh, we can use the C++ library to create nice graphics. And then I started working on this idea of the perfect galaxy that has been terraformed by aliens of a higher imagination and intelligence. And 15 years later, I took these equations and I just walked into one of these IAF. There's this, for me, the experience was thanks to ITICUS, the IAF Technical Committee for the Cultural Utilization of Space. And I've found a bunch of artists, even with sometimes with technical backgrounds. That's how I came to know of this Moon Gallery project. I pitched my project, got accepted, and then voila, flew to the moon, flew to the International Space Station, maybe one day to the moon. So yeah, there are, like I said, art and space have gone hand in hand, have walked hand in hand since the beginning of space exploration. Art has predated space exploration by millennia, as you said, through cave paintings, etc. So opportunities are always there. Just keep eyes open, and there's always space for interesting ideas to be showcased. Another thing I did was to be an artist in residence at conferences. So one of my favorites was at the European Geosciences Union. They have a dedicated artist in residence program, and I was one in 2021. And what we did through this residency program was to go and chat with scientists and convert their abstract into art pieces. So one of the scientists with whom I actually worked on, he went on to he went on to win the Young's Researcher Award of that year at the EGU. Of course, not thanks to this art piece. Like, credit goes solely to his work, but he did reach out to me saying, "Hey, the work we did together, I was able to showcase it during my presentations, and people really loved having this artistic element to a very highly technical paper on microscopic explorations of mountains." And this art piece was actually printed on a T-shirt in this year's EGU and sold as merchandise. Yeah, there are opportunities are always there. It's important to not walk in with an empty slate, in my opinion, because there are too many people doing that. So already explore something and walk in with something to showcase, and then you eventually find collaborations. And that is on how do you actually collaborate, but on a personal side, yeah, do not let go of this creative side of you. And Rachna, I've been hearing you say this that, oh, I have a very engineering mindset, but no, you're an artist for me. You're setting up this very creative approach to making science interesting, for taking the words of uh, people who are passionate about what they do to the general public. I think for me, this is a creative space that you've created, and thanks for that.
Okay, so now you've given me the confidence to also call myself a space artist. I'm going to do that and I'm going to give you as my reference. Give Priyanka approved me as a space artist.
Yeah, approved.
Great. So this conversation has been so enriching, Priyanka, for me. I've really explored into myself. I wouldn't say you've encouraged me. Sounds very formal. But yeah, it's been more of a journey within for me, as corny or
No,
as
that's the point. But thanks, even for me.
as corny as it sounds. But this was a fantastic start to my week, especially early in the morning when as always, I have been sleep deprived for a year. It's been quite stimulating for my right brain. My brain thanks you from with all its brain cells. Oh, it's been super fun. And you've shared so many incredible insights on what it really means to be an artist or what art really means in the whole, space ecosystem. And I guess, like you rightly said, perhaps most of humanity are actually artists, or probably all of them are in one way or another, but they just don't realize it.
Yeah, just like my grandmother is a scientist because she knows how to survive in extreme conditions. She knows how to create food out of nothing from a bare field, going to fish, finding the right kind of fish. Like to a lot of people today, she would be like, ah, just a villager. But for me, no, she's a highly technically skilled person. It's just that she didn't get a PhD in pisciculture. So,
She definitely knows a lot more than a lot of degree holders, I'm sure.
so same with art. You don't need an arts degree to be an artist. You just need an open mind, uh, a spirit for exploration, and a blank piece of paper to write down all your stuff.
It's wonderful. That's very beautifully said. And so, if space professionals or students or anyone who is interested in space and art, they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to reach you?
Yes, so I'll leave my website, which has my contact details in it, and I'm very reachable by email. And yeah, would love to start any collaboration with anyone, anywhere. Currently in the domain of water, if you're really interested, because I'm very interested in exploring the community-based aspect of flood resilience, which for me has a very strong artistic element. So just to, before I quit, I just wanted to elaborate a bit more on this cultural project that I'm exploring within my work at Vortex. So there's this city we identified, which number one requirement suffers from floods. City in France that suffers from floods. This city is actually twinned with a city in Croatia, the second pilot project where I'm heading this project. On top of it, it's now independent of our research, also being boosted by the local water agency as a city of interest for installing more microstations because people have been complaining since decades that government's not doing anything. But government is doing something and they just are starting to find the means for it. And this city has a very strong history with Croatia. So there's this whole cultural link as well. So we're trying to explore, trying to see if this can be a pilot project for testing out a community-based system for this project with the UN, so the WMO. And yeah, let's see where this goes. So art can always play a part in any technology. As they say, earth without art is eh.
Sorry, I didn't get you. Okay, can you say that again?
So as they say, earth, like EARTH,
Oh.
without art is EH, eh, which is true.
Oh my god, that is so cool. Did you come up with that?
I saw this on some Instagram post.
That is, oh my god, yeah, that's so perfectly put. Wonderful. So thank you so much for your time, Priyanka. This has been so fabulous.
Thank you, Rashna, for helping me also formulate a lot of this stuff, which is just formless meanderings in my brain. And to be able to actually put it into words actually helps me as well because then because I have to write papers about it.